Was the assassination attempt on Trump a hoax? A meta-analysis. To verify the authenticity of such incidents when trying to assess the situation in isolation from a wider context is difficult. This is further complicated by the confusion of war or deception. A purely detail-oriented analysis rarely leads to a sufficient insight into the bigger picture. The aim of such an investigation must be to obtain an insight into the big picture, which is finalized with a definitive conclusion that allows decisions to be made based on it. Otherwise, one remains stuck in the eternal investigation of ever smaller details. The more external circumstances one includes in the assessment of such a situation, the more accurate the assessment becomes. The following 15 points represent such an overall assessment and culminate in a final conclusion. 1. Cui bono, who benefits from it? Hoaxes are staged. That is a Machiavellian political reality. They are staged to achieve very specific political objectives. School shootings are staged to promote gun control. Spectacular accidents are staged to promote driverless technology and tighten the control grid. What political objective does a staged assassination serve? It is done when political candidates are behind in order to put them ahead. Trump was already ahead before the incident. The official poll numbers were already higher than Biden's, which means the actual poll numbers are much higher as they are regularly downplayed. Hillary was called the winner with 97% certainty in some official polls in 2016 to create a self-fulfilling prophecy by demotivating potential voters of the other candidate. Just like Trump was way ahead in 2020, which is why they had to rig the election, which they did. But this time they won't be able to rig the election to the same extent because various countermeasures have been taken and the public is too aware, so it's difficult or unlikely for them to reality create another stolen election because awareness blocks the manifestation of possibilities. This is called the observer effect in quantum mechanics. Trump needing higher poll numbers is therefore not an argument for staging a hoax, as a victim martyr bonus is not necessary. Some say this was done to get the undecided swing voters on board. Trump doesn't need the swing voters. All he needs is for the election not to be rigged. Then he wins in a landslide just like he won the 2020 election. Given all this, a staged assassination serves no political purpose for Trump. Cui bono, who benefits from it? Trump did not. Or rather, whether he benefited from it in terms of his poll ratings is irrelevant to the election result. 2. They do want to murder Trump. They have announced this at every opportunity and have gone as far as they can to incite someone to do it. Kathleen Griffin held a blood-drenched, lifelike decapitated head of Trump in her hands. Snoop Dogg mock executed a Trump look-alike in a video. In New York City's Shakespeare in the Park production, a Trump look-alike was stabbed to death by a crowd. Actors impersonating Trump are regularly shot in series. Newsreaders, politicians, and even Biden himself use phrases that suggest Trump should be shot. This is done to both incite and psychologically condition the population using predictive programming into accepting that it will eventually manifest because they have been familiarized with it and expect and accept it as an inevitable outcome. Their attempt to assassinate Trump is the logical progression of their obvious efforts to eliminate him. They began with unprecedented defamation, humiliation, and incitement to murder, psychological information warfare, sued him dozens of times in court legal warfare, and are now attempting to assassinate him physical warfare. It is their standard mode of operation to try soft tactics first, hoping they will suffice until they run out of options, and then resort to assassination attempts either out of desperation or psychopathic rationale. This happens regularly. Hillary Clinton's personal kill list alone is pages long. With some, they succeed. With others, they don't. 3. The improbability and implausibility of an event is not proof that it is staged. It is the natural characteristic of tragedies to be improbable and unbelievable. Ask any survivor of an accident or any recipient of bad medical news how likely and believable they thought it was. Tragedies are often improbable and always unbelievable. They are incisive events that tear those affected out of the flow of life and leave them confused and in a state of dissociation, out of touch with life, floating like ghosts. Another reality about tragedies is that they often happen because one tiny, insignificant thing went wrong. Something was out of place or in the wrong place at the worst possible time. So the fact that something is too perfect or too imperfect does not prove that it is impossible or implausible, but is a completely normal characteristic of such events. And all accidents are photogenic in some way. That's the reason for the problem with gawkers who simply can't look away at accidents, take pictures and videos, and thus block traffic. It's human nature to be intrigued by the extraordinary or extreme. 4. Trump's head movement, it was not miraculous, just the timing was well. It was what he did several times before when he looked at the graphic to his side, and this graphic wasn't new either. He had used it in many rallies. The shooter's failure to adjust to his head movements was either due to a lack of understanding of physics speed of the bullet compared to the speed of movement of the head, or not watching him long enough before the shot and assuming Trump's head would be stationary as soon as he looked through the scope just before the shot, or nervousness and lack of concentration. Or the shooter took all of this into account, but Trump's final head movement did not align with the previous ones he made. As a video on the internet with graphics shows, Trump would have been fatally shot if he had not moved his head at the very last fraction of a second. 5. Trump's ear injury. I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of my right ear, Trump. According to medical literature, the bullet wound would be small, round, or slightly oval. Bruising and hematoma can occur on impact, damaging blood vessels under the skin, which can lead to bruising, contusions, and hematoma pooling of blood. Trump appears to have a large bruise on the upper part of his ear, which confirms this. Judging from afar, the injury seems to meet medical textbook description. Because of all the commotion that followed the shooting and Trump disappearing below, a bunch of agents who may have briefly inspected the wound applied pressure to it, Trump wiping his own face with his jacket or being wiped across his face, not much can be said about the blood pattern. The fact that his face was wiped is confirmed by a blood swab on the cheek and interrupted blood lines running from the ear to the mouth. Now, Texas Congressman Ronnie Jackson, who served as Trump's White House physician, has clarified and confirmed his injuries. According to Jackson, Trump suffered a gunshot wound to his right ear that was less than 1/4 of an inch from penetrating his head and struck the upper portion of his right ear. The bullet mark caused a 2-inch wide wound that extended to the cartilage surface of the ear. Initially, there was profuse bleeding, followed by marked swelling of the entire upper ear. This description is consistent with what was seen immediately after the assassination attempt and what such a wound would be like according to medical literature. It also means that a scar will be visible later. This would not be the case if there had been no actual injury. There is the theory that one of the purposes of the allegedly staged assassination was so that Trump could wear a white patch on his ear, apparently in the same place that recipients of Musk's Neuralink implant receive a patch, to program the masses into accepting brain chips. It's a vigilant concern, but that's not how programming works. As all the major social engineers unanimously agree, the basic foundation of psychological programming is repetition. It has to be done over and over again to have an effect and to drill into people's minds. Trump wore the big white Band-Aid at exactly one event, his appearance at the RNC and his second appearance at the Michigan rally. He wore a small, barely visible brown Band-Aid. This is a woefully inadequate effort at mass programming. A Band-Aid covering a gunshot wound is not a good advertisement for a brain implant. If this symbolism suggests anything, it is that brain implants are inevitably fatal if they enter the brain, if bullet equals brain implant. 6. Authentic behavior vs. acting. Trump's unconscious reflexes, conscious movements, and assumable cognitive processes throughout seem authentic in sequence and speed. To comprehend this, one can imagine and act out what it would be like to be hit in this way. A reenactment makes Trump's reaction look authentic. First, the flinch and immediate contortion of his face in pain, the movement of his hand towards the wound to feel for it, the brief glancing of his fingertips to check, the shock spasm of his hand, the raising of his shoulders and subsequent ducking. The reflexes and instincts of this sequence seem completely natural. He spurs himself to take cover, get down. The spurring himself on to take cover is a strong authenticity feature. Trump is 78 years old, and despite his apparently robust health, he is still a senior. He ducked just as quickly as a person his age would, if forced to. He forces himself through the pain of a sudden deep squat. Few people older than 70 can perform sudden movements without pain, or at all. Even in cases where there is a great will and dedication to deceive, a deceiver's knowledge that he is in no real danger, while pretending to be in danger, betrays him through his body language. Trump's ducking didn't come across as a relatively comfortable acting performance, but like a 78-year-old who had no choice but to throw himself to the ground. Let me get my shoes. That's another authenticity feature. If the whole thing were staged, he wouldn't have lost his shoes and acted turmoil, which is a somewhat embarrassing mishap for a man that makes him appear clumsy and out of control and too humanly weak, an outside perception that leaders must generally avoid presenting. This shows that it was a real mess. Wait, fist pump the fact that he once again asks the Secret Service personnel around him to wait while they push him off the stage is evidence of a lack of coordination or two opposing wills. Hoax's staging crisis actors usually move and act with a high degree of synchronization as everything is pre-planned and follows a script that all of them know. A well-known characteristic of hoaxers is that their scripts lack convincing elements of human nature, of natural life. Their level of sophistication is quite shallow. They miss out on the little details of life that no one saw coming, which is one reason they seem so ridiculously fake to keen observers. Trump's behavior, on the other hand, is very authentic. 7. Blood or no blood on his hand. During his RNC appearance, Trump said, "I moved my right hand to my ear, brought it down, my hand was covered with blood." After he was shot, Trump briefly touched his right ear with his fingertips a second after being hit. There could have been blood on his fingertips. Even the highest resolution video footage of this scene does not allow traces of blood on a hand or fingertips to be seen from a distance because the colors blur, especially with a moving hand. As he went to the ground and lay down, he propped his hand on the podium and then on the floor, wiping away the traces of blood on his fingers or fingertips. There were also several Secret Service agents lying over him, wiping his face, Trump putting his hand on someone's suit, etc. So after he got up, there were no clear traces of blood on his hands. Blood on my hand, blood-stained hand, hand covered in blood. That's semantics. What would be the alternative to the expression hand covered in blood? My hand had some blood on it. Had some blood on it. Given the seriousness of the incident, this expression, even if it were more factually accurate, seems inappropriate. It is an expression that is appropriate for a slight nosebleed, for example, but it does not do justice to this incident. Perhaps it was a questionable choice of words, a deliberate exaggeration, or a chronological confusion of the event, because when he later sat in the car holding his injured ear and applying pressure to stop the bleeding, his hand was actually completely covered in blood. Trump also said in the leaked phone conversation with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that he felt like the world's biggest mosquito had bitten him when he was hit. Is that what he was really thinking at that moment? Should we hold him accountable for this figurative speech as evidence of a lack of accuracy and trustworthiness, since it clearly wasn't a mosquito that bit him? In any case, the bleeding of fake injuries need not be exaggerated. It can be presented in any form. If they had used fake blood, they could have applied any amount of it. So if he exaggerated the amount of blood on his hand, if he was referring to the moment he briefly touched his ear after it was hit, and not the moment he was in the car later, then that's actually an indication of the authenticity of the injury. 8. Fight. Fight. Fight Trump's iconic fist pumps. Many understand that it takes courage to stand up after being shot at, to shout and gesticulate to the crowd in the same direction from which bullets flew moments before, and few can see themselves doing so because they lack that courage themselves. From which it follows that they judge by their own standards and don't believe anyone would do such a thing, leading to mistrust. Perhaps Trump knew his injury wasn't life-threatening, thought the situation was clear after the Secret Service confirmed shooter down, and wanted to signal to the audience that even being wounded wouldn't stop him from fighting, or that fighting and never giving up is the answer in any situation, no matter how dire. Or perhaps he wasn't sure how serious his wound was and wanted to send his final message to the world to fight. Another reason could be that he had the presence of mind to show the public that he was still alive and well enough to make several gestures of strength. He wouldn't be the first to have an attempt on his life that failed, but then was taken out on the way to the hospital or on the operating table, leaving everyone wondering how a minor injury could kill the person. Well, they were killed in the ambulance or in the hospital on the operating table by an injection of undetectable poison or by medical foul play that is hard to prove. There are several cases where people have even survived gunshots to the head or bullet-riddled bodies. So the conspirators either have to make sure their target is riddled with fatal bullets or have their co-conspirators among the target's medical staff or waiting in the nearest hospital like spiders in a web. Among those who have survived assassination attempts on them and then died in the hospital are Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, whose assassination was the cause of the outbreak of the First World War, Princess Diana, and John F. Kennedy. 9. Why shoot him and not use a heart attack gun? If they really wanted to assassinate him, why did they send a lone gunman with a rifle possibly backed up by a second or third shooter and not use silent weapons for maximum deniability? They do have technology and interdimensional abilities to commit silent, trackless murders, but they operate under metaphysical rules imposed on them. They are not allowed to use silent weapons for quiet wars in every case and on every person. If it were otherwise, there would simply be no opposition and they would have absolute power. But they do not. There are individuals they cannot simply assassinate or assassinate in a certain way because their spiritual profile, their level of protection, their destiny forbids it. To murder such a person, if this were even possible, would be a serious violation of the metaphysical rules and would have drastic consequences for them. They would be getting rid of a problem they have and replacing it with a much bigger one that would manifest itself later. Why would they do it anyway? Because they would give themselves momentary relief and postpone the consequences of their actions until another day. Ultimately, of course, they will pay the price. They also believe that they can undermine these laws by exploiting loopholes and bending the rules without breaking them. So one could speculate that they believe forcing someone else to do it, patsies and corrupt military snipers, brings less karmic responsibility and backlash for them, as they are merely persuading someone else to do it by amplifying their own beliefs, tempting their will, or giving an order that could be refused, all without pulling the trigger themselves. The shooter was probably groomed for months or years by agents of the ABC agencies who formally recruited him, or by cyber agents who maintained an online relationship with him, using psychotronic weapon technologies against him or interdimensional forces that warped his perceptions and poisoned his emotions until he was finally ready to carry out his task. However, there are also several cases where they attempt to violate such metaphysical laws out of sheer desperation. These attempts usually fail but leave some scratches on their targets. This is exactly what we have seen with Trump. Why did the mind-controlled patsy shooter, including the accompanying snipers, fail to assassinate Trump? Because it wasn't supposed to happen. His destiny shielded him. 10. Higher dimensional battles manifest as anomalous events in the physical world. They can be close calls because they are the result of last-minute efforts, or rather the result of complex processes whose outcome is unlikely to go one way or the other because the advantages that either force has over the other are too small for an outcome to be definitive. Hence, the outcome is literally by a hair's breadth. Such interventions also tend to convey symbolic messages that provide spiritual revelations or are to be interpreted in certain ways, for example, as warnings. Positive forces could likely have ensured that no bullet hit Trump, but they let it be a warning to the world, with the symbolic meaning of dodged a bullet but not quite, that the world is in a dodge a bullet situation right now or about to be. Trump always says they hate me because they have to go through me to get to you. In other words, they see him as us, a representative of us. The larger symbolic meaning here is possibly that we are in the process of barely dodging a bullet with a third world war on the horizon. 11. Karmic backlashes of hoaxes. Although it would be technically possible to stage such an event with very extensive effort blanks, blood capsule, crisis actors, assassins, snipers, spectators and victims plus families and colleges, this is prohibited by a metaphysical dynamic. An assassination attempt staged by Trump would make a real assassination of him more likely, which is why it makes no sense for him to do it. A hoax on the world stage is a great deception, and a great deception is a great crime of an essentially satanic character, the devil, the great deceiver that lowers the vibration of those who commit it, bringing them deeper into the vibrational territory of dark forces, which are the same forces that are trying to assassinate him. This process cannot be outwitted. It is a metaphysical law. When someone commits a moral crime, their vibrational rate drops and remains low unless they go through a process of repentance, making it inevitable that a crime will befall them. This is known as karma, or Newton's third law of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. 12. Occult signs and symbols. Occultism is not a synonym for dark practices. Occult simply means hidden information. Occultism surrounds all people and events of significance in this world. However, its mere presence does not reveal the why of its presence, nor the nature, affiliation, and intentions of the person involved. Events occur on dates that happen to have occult significance. The year has only 365 days, a statistically insignificantly small number. Even if the year is included, the probability does not increase astronomically. Patterns that resemble occult symbols occur randomly. They may be a natural part of body mechanics, the flow of fluids, the basic structures of math, physics, chemistry, and biology. There are only so many geometric shapes and numbers that the probability of similarity is high. Occult symbols without context do not reveal their meaning. Someone could die on an occult-relevant day, but not as a timely suicidal ritual homage to the devil, but because he was poisoned by an assassin from a satanic cult. The relevance of the context of life is greater than that of occult details. There is a great lack of knowledge about how to interpret occult patterns accurately. In addition to ignorance, naivety is also widespread. While most today have learned to be critical of any information from the media, they remain completely uncritical of sources of the occult, even though the same intentions and acts of disinformation can be found in this area, only with a much higher degree of deception and sophistication. Negative groups have timeline monitoring technologies such as Looking Glass, and they propagandistically prepare for timelines that have a negative outcome for them by preemptively disseminating sabotaging information. Signs and symbols rule the world, yes, but just as language has a structure and words only have meaning when they are put in the right order, symbols only have meaning when they are in a logical, functional context. What most do when it comes to interpreting symbols using normal language as a reference is to talk gibberish that makes no sense. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, as the psychoanalytic saying goes. This means that not everything has a symbolic meaning. By their fruits you shall know them. Judge them by their deeds, not by the highly interpretable signs whose function largely eludes all but the most initiated that surround them. While signs and symbols can indicate possible deception in the future, and one should always be vigilant to avoid being caught off guard, until a person's actions indicate otherwise, these signs and symbols remain mere interpretations of tea leaves. The next point gives an example of an occult insight that actually has substance and real relevance and is supported by documentation, statistics, known methods used regularly, and a long comparative history. 13. Here's who is really responsible for the assassination attempt on Trump. The crooks did it, obviously. No, not Thomas Matthew Crooks, the real crooks. Here is a list of individuals Trump repeatedly referred to as crooks. Hillary Clinton, crooked Hillary. Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, corrupted crooks. Former CIA Director John Brennan, one of the biggest crooks. Former FBI Director James Comey, lying crook. Former Deputy Director of the FBI Andrew McCabe, a crook lying under oath. Former FBI Agent Peter Strzok, a crooked cop. Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, a crooked politician. Former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, a deep state lying machine, not a crook by choice of term, but a crook by definition. Special Counsel Robert Swan Mueller, everything about his investigation was crooked. He really does call him that a lot. And they resent it because, believe it or not, these individuals would prefer to be taken seriously and seen as legitimate and are dependent on the appearance of law-abidingness. All tyrants hate truth and humor because both undermine the perception of them as legitimate wielders of power, a perception they have worked hard, cheated, lied, stole, and murdered to obtain. Is it a coincidence that Trump's alleged assassin's surname is the most well-known exposing term Trump uses for his political opponents? Not a chance. It's a calling card they always leave behind that clearly states we the crooks did it. The devil must show his hand. Metaphysical law requires him to take responsibility. The crooks did it. And the crooks are the corrupted lying machines of the deep state. Therefore, the deep state did it. To go into this in more detail, the surname Crooks is quite rare, with about 10,000 total name bearers in the U.S., or 0.003% of the population. It is a truly miraculous statistical coincidence that one of these is the suspected assassin. Whoever Thomas Matthew Crooks was, and whatever role he played in the assassination, he was not the mastermind of the assassination, but merely played a role, the role of a manipulated pawn. The real assassins are still out there, and they will try again. 14. They are Satanists, and Satanists turn everything upside down, invert everything, which manifests psychologically as projection. That is, they blame others for everything they themselves do, say, and are. This also includes fabricating hoaxes. They fabricate hoaxes and defend these to the very last breath with mountains of lies, with insidious deceit, with condemning feigned outrage, emotional terrorization, social destruction, radical censorship, and legal warfare aimed at the existential annihilation of critics and non-believers. When the same satanic scum collectively start calling an event a hoax directly or insinuatingly, as in the case of the Trump assassination attempt, we know it must have been real. Because Satanists always lie and deceive and always invert reality. 15. All the world's a stage and the lie reigns supreme in the empire of lies. But times are changing. Both evil and good are active in the world, balancing each other out, and the scales are about to tip in favor of good. Not everything that happens on the world stage is a hoax. Not everyone is a disingenuous fraud. Real events happen, real tragedies happen, real murders happen. In 2023, 18,456 murders were recorded in the U.S., and the number is even higher if attempted murders are included. Politicians are regularly murdered around the world. While the attempted murder of a politician is socially and historically spectacular, it is not a statistically anomalous event. Several U.S. presidents have been shot at and some of them killed. The fact that this assassination attempt on Trump took place is not at all surprising. All political analysts have been predicting it for years. And now it has happened exactly as was reasonably foreseeable. Far too many now act surprised and incredulous as to how a possibility long predicted for very valid reasons could ever come true, and that only the fact that it is not true would explain it. Absurd and a symptom of a disconnect from reality, a lack of political attention. Also, because too many investigators are distracted with interpreting figure-of-speech statements and symbolism, believing this to be enough to understand the world, it is not. Conclusion. Examine in isolation. This event has too many features of authenticity to be a theatrical act. Apparent inconsistencies which suspicious observers believe to identify irregular confusions of war. Examined in the larger context, it makes no logical sense to stage such an event. Both parts combined, this leads to the conclusion that it was an authentic event. Authentic but not truthful, since a presumably second and even third shooter are not mentioned in the official version. And that parts of the Secret Service and/or the police were compromised and involved in the operation is more than likely. The theory of a lone gunman is probably accepted as official version because an attempted murder by a coordinated sniper team, an apparently mind-controlled pawn assassin and traitors in the innermost circle of the security forces is too politically explosive, which would have a highly destabilizing effect politically and is therefore dealt with internally.
If you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened.
We came, we saw, he died.